The ones who really struggled with it, who almost like couldn't talk to me, who were ready to shut off the friendship, and some actually did cut off the friendship. In hindsight, with a few years looking back, they have admitted or I have seen that was more about their insecurity, about what it meant if I just so easily quit doing the thing that meant so much to them. Does it mean that it's not important?
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. What if the life everyone applauds you for isn't the life you actually want? My guest today is Kayaian, and after spending decades at the highest levels of classical music, Kate made a bold move many people only fantasize about. She walked away from the identities she had built since childhood to create something more aligned with who she was becoming. She's the author of Beyond Potential, where she helps high achievers, creatives, and anyone feeling stuck reassess old stories, redefine success, and step into what's next. We talk about reinvention, letting go of labels, and why potential can become a trap, and how to know when it's time to pivot. If you've outgrown the version of yourself everyone else still believes in, this one's for you. Kayaian, thank you so much for being here on A Joyful Rebellion today.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, James. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It is, because we're talking about something today that I haven't really talked about in this way. I think I've talked with people about big career changes. I've had a lot of guests on who were either forced, from outside forces, or just something internally where they thought to themselves, okay, I can probably do this whole life thing a little bit differently. And I talked to a lot of people who are high achievers. They identify with their work. They're deeply interested in their work. And then one day something changes and they have to figure it out from there. And that's part of what the whole rebellion is about, right? So I want to talk to you today about risk. I want to talk to you about potential. You've written a book. It's called Beyond Potential.
That's right.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But before I hit record, you had a really cool analogy of how you help people think about their potential and how they're going through their life right now. Share that and how you came up with it.
Yeah, well, it's not something I came up with. I mean, it's a story about the power of listening to podcasts, right? I was doing some work at home in my career as a concert cellist, and I was listening to a podcast in the background, and the story popped up, and the guy said, yeah, it's like that story that you die and you go to heaven, and the first person you meet in heaven is the version of yourself that did all of the things you've always wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, I mean, I don't know, anybody listening, like you just get that picture in your mind and suddenly all of these things pop up immediately. Whether that's like, yeah, that guy ran the marathon that I've been talking about running for a decade and a half, right? And like, yeah, that person finally went back to school and finished their PhD, and this person did that, and that version did that. And it really starts to occur to you what those things are that you've been putting off or that you just kind of ignore. Like, oh yeah, I've always wanted to learn Italian. Sure, someday. Like, no, they speak fluent Italian, and why don't I? That's sort of where things shifted for me.
When you were at that point in your life where you heard that, it sounds, just reading your bio, that you were pretty deep in one world.
Yeah.
That you don't find yourself in quite as deep anymore. So is that what got your wheels turning about, oh, I'm in charge of this thing. I could make a decision right now and live into it. What was that, the turning point for you personally?
It absolutely was. I mean, I was So I was a concert cellist, professional classical musician. I started the cello when I was 4.5. So this was all I knew. It was my entire identity. At that point, I already had an idea that I, I loved it, but I didn't want to keep doing the same thing I was doing for another 30 years, 40 years. At the same time, I didn't want to do it more than I was doing, right? For me at that level, to up level it meant being on the road more, it meant missing more family events and more friends' weddings and, and I was really thinking about, should I stop doing it? What should I do? And we'll get into how rebellious that truly is in the classical music world in a second. But yeah, that podcast moment when I heard that version of myself wasn't carrying a cello, running backstage at Carnegie Hall to play the Dvorak cello concerto. It was all of these other things that my career was keeping me from doing were the things that really mattered to me at that point in my life. I'm a big believer that we're never wrong about what we set out to do, but we evolve. Our priorities shift, our lives shift. And that was no longer what I held up as the be all end all of my existence. It took a while for me to catch on to the fact that those things had shifted for me. So hearing that podcast, it really was a catalyst of like, okay, Kate, like let's do something about that.
That perfectly describes the process people come to a lot when they describe the moment where they, as I say in this podcast a lot, they pick up the pen and start writing the story of their life instead of kind of just acting it out, taking someone else's script and acting it out. Because you said 4.5, I'm guessing you didn't, as a 4.5-year-old, come to your parents and say, you know what, guys, I think what would be cool is if you could take me down to where I can learn to play the cello. Because if
it's
it
even
was
better than that, James.
Okay, lay
it's
it
a
on
quick
us.
story, but it's a good one. My mom had played a little piano. She loved piano, but so she had a friend who was deep into the sort of string Suzuki method, right? So she had a daughter who was my best friend and my age who played violin, and a son who was my older brother's age and his best friend, Blake, and he played the cello and the piano. And so she said, it's time, Katie should start getting into some music lessons. It's really good for kids to play music. My mom agreed. And she said, just bring her over and the kids will play and she'll choose which of those 3 instruments she loves the most, right? She'll be naturally drawn to something. So Carla, my best friend, played her violin. I was very impressed. Blake played his piano and his cello, and cello was his main instrument. And James, I might have been 4.5, but I understood clearly that I loved Blake and that the only way Blake and I would be able to get married is if we played the same instrument. You can't get married if you play different instruments, right? So I played the cello.
Makes total sense.
It makes total sense. So that was what it was. So in a way, yes, I did choose it, but it was presented to me. And yeah, my entire career was defined by the person I had a crush on when I was 4.5. He quickly the family moved to Colorado and, my heart was broken. But I did love the cello and I had great teachers and I took to it. And apparently I had, between the support of my family and great teaching and great opportunities, I did pretty well. So It all worked out.
It is fascinating how so early in life something can shape what the next several decades of your life end up looking like.
Yeah. And that was an important moment for me to look back on when I was going through this process of like, what do you mean you're going to leave this world and my colleagues and my friends? Because again, I don't know if many people know this, but you don't leave classical music. You don't even really retire from classical music. You play until you drop dead on stage, quite literally, in a lot of or at least you sort of step back and you are, the 100-year-old master pedagogue teaching the younger generations. But it's not something that you ever retire from and leave, unless you're injured, unless you have some serious thing. And part of that was looking back and say, it is a little bit arbitrary that I ever started doing this in the first place. It's not like it was written into my code of like, this is what you were born to do. I think people have various talents. I think people are maybe more talented in certain areas than others. I think music was probably one of those areas for me. I was drawn to it and I loved it, but I don't think it was the only one. In fact, I know now that it wasn't the only one. So I'm glad I was able to rebel against that and explore that a little bit.
I want to talk about that exploration because you're listening to this podcast and some things are going off in your brain saying, oh, I need to think about this more. But you'd already had a quarter of a century into this one thing that you've been so focused on. And when I'm talking to people, and some theme that comes up quite often is the concept of the sunk cost fallacy. You know, you've done something for so long, you've gotten to a certain point where you've had outwardly people see you as at the top of your game. And one thing you talk a lot about is when you are in your career and you're at the top of your game, that might be the time to evaluate what happens next. Talk a little bit about when you put all of those things together and got over that discomfort of, oh my gosh, I've been doing this and in my world, you're not supposed to retire, and all these shoulds that were coming up for you. When was the breakthrough?
In a way, I was very lucky because I was given an opportunity with the lockdown in 2020. So I'd been having these feelings, having these thoughts, and was just sort of rushing, battling through it, pushing through it. Everybody was saying, you need to be playing, better concerts, try leveling it up. I'm like, okay, I'll try. I don't think that's what I want, but I'll try. And I had a big concert tour of the West Coast of the US planned for early to mid-April 2020. And I played a concert here in Bermuda on March 13th. And we knew that day that was it. As of the next day, we all were going to be locked up in our houses. And I knew that tour was canceled. I knew that all of my performances were going to be canceled for the foreseeable future. And I mentioned it. I, said on stage, I said, this is going to be the last time for a while that we can all gather like this and share music. And people, my friends who were there in the audience, remember that I was almost getting a little emotional about it. And what they don't realize was that the emotion I was feeling was relief. I was feeling such gratitude that I didn't it was great music. I love to play that music. It's not like I didn't know. I'd been playing it for months. It's not like I was nervous about this tour. I had no anxiety about the tour. But the second I knew I didn't have to go on it, I was like, oh, yeah, that's what I really want. That's what I didn't want to do it. And so that time, that forced sabbatical really gave me the opportunity to step back and use some other skills. And I just kind of left myself open to what is it that I'm drawn to do? How do I want to spend my time right now? It's easy to say in hindsight, okay, it's 2026. It's easy to say like, oh, I was a performing concert cellist until 2020 and then COVID hit and I never performed again. And now I'm an author and a coach and a podcaster and a speaker. There was that in-between period, of course, James. We all have that in-between period. So I still had a studio full of students, advanced high school and college-age students that I was working with online. I had been on Zoom for years at that point. So it was like, my students were like, so lesson as usual tomorrow, laughing. So I was teaching. I created some online programs for classical musicians that were hugely successful. I loved working on websites. I loved the marketing aspect of it. I loved the writing that went along with it, copywriting and conversations I was having with people. I loved putting projects together. And I loved talking to people about things. And I spent more time writing in my blog, which then ended up becoming my podcast. And things just sort of naturally evolved in working with, colleagues started to come to me and say, hey, can you help me start projects too? Because my concerts have been canceled. I have no money. Help me start a festival or something online. I was doing that and I realized that they too were struggling with these ideas of wanting to do something different. Maybe they didn't want to stop playing the way I did, but they wanted to play and do something different, and they didn't know how to give themselves permission to do something different. And it was the same people who for years had been saying, no, Kate, you're not allowed to quit. You cannot. You're too good. We need you. You just cannot stop playing. Would come to me and say, okay, actually, you know what? Me too. Can you help me? So that's sort of what took me. I realized that I needed to learn how to be an actual coach, because I could give them the laundry list of things to do to start a project, but it was the mental lift of pivoting, of rebelling, of changing your life in some way, of doing something out of your zone of comfort, outside of your current identity. And I loved it. It completely lit me up to work with people in that way. And that led me to writing my book, because, everybody, I think, who writes a nonfiction book writes the book about the things that they keep saying every day over and over and over again. And you realize, I think more people than I thought need to hear this.
I'd love to get to what some of the common themes are, because what you just described, it sounds like you made these changes in your own life. You saw how liberating having some of those thoughts, like, oh, I could put down this instrument and not force myself to feel the guilt of all of this lost opportunity, is what it sounds like was being presented to you. Like, oh, you have the potential to experience all these things. And in your mind, you're thinking, yeah, but I want to do something different. I want to live my life. And then you started working with people who were having those same thoughts, and were getting to the point where they were willing to take action on those thoughts. And I bet the more you started working with those people, especially if they were creative people like in your world, then a lot of those folks had something in common. What are some of the things that they had in common that led you to say, okay, I'm saying the same things over and over and over again. I need to write this down. It needs to be a guidebook so I can give it to people and say, hey, read this first, then let's talk. Let's get together and talk about your own situation.
Yeah. Well, the full title of my book, just as a hint, is Beyond Potential, a guide for creatives who want to reassess, redefine, and reignite their careers. And of course, the creatives part was because back when I had the idea for the book, I was really mostly working with creatives, but I would say more than half the people who have read my book are not creatives. I think it works for everybody. But to answer your question, the things that were coming up for everybody were one of three stages. The first one, that people really had a hard time pulling themselves away from their identity, from the stories, from the reasons why they weren't allowed to make a change, that simply society wouldn't let them, that people would think they just weren't good enough and couldn't hack it. They couldn't take the pressure, right? I work with a lot of high achievers, and I know you have a lot of high achievers listening right now. And that is a big one that comes up. If I pivot, people will think it's because I wasn't good enough to stay.
Yeah.
And so talking through those stories, reassessing those stories. And I say reassess because, this is not our first rodeo. We're all adults. We've assessed our lives. We've assessed our situations. And sometimes at a certain point, life hits us and we need to say, okay, I need to do this again with the experience and the wisdom that I have now. Is it true? Is it really true? And am I too old to start something new? Do I have enough time yet to learn the skills for a new career? Yeah. I mean, yeah, you do. The answer is yes. But reassessing those stories. So a lot of clients would get stuck in those old stories that were keeping them trapped, right? So I did a lot of that work. And that's the first part of the book, is addressing those stories. The second thing is that people would have trouble figuring out what they want to do. Sometimes they would come to me and say, I don't want to do this anymore. It's no longer bringing me joy, but I'm not sure what I want to do exactly. And so that's the middle part of the book, is exploring. I talk about, just if you can just find one thing, even if it's, I don't know what I want to do, but I know that I want to work from home. Okay, great. I don't know what I want to do, but I know that I want to have a completely flexible schedule. Great. I don't know what I want to do, but I know I want it to have something to do with education. Wonderful, right? And so we talk about how to take that one thing that as vague as it might be, and work through it and get there. And then the third part is reignite. And so, I have had clients who, yes, they've reassessed their stories and they've redefined, they've figured out what they want to work towards and who they want to be, how they want to be seen in this world, have really gotten a clear idea of who that version is of themselves, that version that did all the things that they want to do. They have a very clear picture of that. And then they just get stuck on the action taking. So a lot of my clients, not all of them, some of them are like, okay, great, I'm going to go to it. And they get to it and they find their success. And a lot of them get stuck in the time management, they do what I call our rocking chair tasks. Have you heard that term?
No, it brought up a visual for sure of
right?
something.
Like you feel like you're in action. You feel like you're doing all this work, but you are not going anywhere. Those are the people who are like, yeah, I'm starting a business. Like, oh, do you have any clients yet? No, I'm just working on my business cards.
Get the logo.
They got the logo. It takes
That's right.
months to get a logo together, right? Rocking chair tasks, the things that keep you busy but don't actually move you forward. So the book talks about that. It talks about productivity hacks. So there are people who have read my book who have said, yeah, the first two sections were a game changer, but the third section, like that's kind of what I do. I'm a project manager, or I was a project manager. Like that stuff I've got. Great. Some people need one or two. A lot of people need all three. Yeah. And it's just that kind of book. It's very much you can read the book start to finish. There are a lot of stories and examples in it. It also has a lot of questions. There's a workbook aspect to it, things that you fill out and questions to answer for yourself.
That's fascinating because it can encompass a lot of different people. I would love to drill down on something kind of practical for the people listening or watching on YouTube, because as I talk to people out in nature or whatever you want to call it, out just in the real world, outside of podcast land, there are so many people who I speak with, and I can tell after part of a conversation they're creative people, and they would never in a million years identify that way. They don't feel like they're in a creative industry, whatever their job might be. And you wrote this book kind of steered toward creative people. Those are the kinds of people you're used to being around. Same for me. Whenever I meet someone who is objectively not creative, I'm just sort of like, I'm worried for them, because I don't know what that's like to hang around. But for the purposes of this, if there's someone listening that I don't know if I'm creative or not, I don't feel like I am, could we just throw some criteria, some definition out there?
Absolutely. A definition of what does it mean to be creative?
Yeah, if someone's over here self-identifying as not creative, and I hear this all the time, and I have to bring out I have to bring out the evidence. I'm like, look, you've done this, you got out of this situation, and look what you did with, XYZ over here. That's creativity. And they're like, oh, I never thought about it that way. So what's your definition of creativity if someone's trying to self-identify right now?
I would say anybody who has an original thought about anything. And I don't mean an original thought as in nobody has ever had it before. An original thought of like, what should I have for dinner? I think I'll make some chicken. That's creative. I mean, people say to me, oh, you were a cellist. You must be so creative. And I say to them, no, jazz musicians are creative. I walked on stage. I played the music that somebody wrote. I play every note that they wrote in the order with the volume, dynamics, everything. Like I do what they told me to do. There's not a lot of creativity in there. Yes, I put my own, I think people could tell it was me playing as opposed to another cellist. Maybe that was a creative thing. But you're right. I mean, I think there is always evidence. I had a client who he worked for Google, and he was telling me he wasn't creative, but he really wanted to be. He wanted to pivot into a more creative field, and he was struggling with the fact that he had existed in the world of spreadsheets. And I said, well, tell me about your spreadsheets. Like, what were they about? What did you do? And he goes, oh, I had the best spreadsheets at Google. He's like, they were color coded. They were coordinated. They looked beautiful. I'm like, oh, so you turned your spreadsheets literally into art. Stopped him in his tracks.
Yeah. He's like, oh, I see what you did there.
Oh. He was like, you're worth every penny. But really, he needed to have that evidence pointed out. And it was an obvious thing, right? It didn't take him long to come up with that. But I think if you look, there's evidence. I have a lot of people that write to me after reading my book that they're in the corporate space. They're, C-suite executives, and they never saw themselves as creative. But they say, oh, I realized that I didn't need to quit my job. Actually, I just needed to allow myself to lean into my more artistic side, my knitting that I do on the weekend, or my crafting, that I sort of saw those as like, oh, I'm not supposed to do that. I'm a big, powerful, whatever. And the book helped them see that both of those can exist in their life, and that they can be creative without having to self-identify as, oh, I am a creative. Right.
That's the slippery slope, isn't it? Because so many creative people, they find something that they're passionate about. I'm guilty of this. And then they become that thing. They put that label, like, mm-hmm. I'm a cellist. Mm-hmm. That's really specific. It's not like I'm a musician, because what does that mean? Well, I work with music. But if you say I'm a cellist, well, that's a very specific instrument that's mm-hmm. going to create a specific sound. I did that for 30 years. I said I'm a photographer. And I can't say that anymore necessarily, because I do a lot more work that is moving than I do that are still images. So I can say I'm an image maker. I say I'm a visual artist, but I had to spread that definition a little wider, just because my interests moved me to different places mm-hmm. than they have been. But gosh, a couple decades identifying as one thing mm-hmm. Leaves a stamp, leaves an impression.
And James, I've had this conversation with clients and other people around, and I think it's more of a vocabulary problem than an identity problem. This came to me because a lot of people ask, like, well, are you still a cellist? I'm like, well, I mean, I played the cello for 45 years. Like, I know how to play the cello. You could ask me to play the cello right now, and I could. So I guess that makes me a cellist. But I'm not a professional cellist. I don't earn an income from it. And I did it every single day of my life for all that time. And looking at my cello right now, it's in my studio. I don't think I have opened that case since October. And it's, for anybody listening to this in the future, it's April, right? So how do you answer that question? Am I a cellist? Depends on your definition, right? So I think it's a vocabulary thing, because I could go on and on and on, say like, well, I still have the skills, I am capable of it, blah, 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 I no longer, but nobody has the time for that. So I think it's up to us as individuals to decide what identity fits, what identity feels good for us.
Going back to the fact that concert musicians, people who get to a certain level, they're not, supposed to retire. I've got my air quotes up. And that's kind of the norm in your industry. If someone is working within right now, they're at the top of their game, they are at the point where, gosh, I'm doing some cool stuff, but I feel like I'm a little bored. They feel that twitchiness, that you get when you've kind of been there, done that, and you've rinsed and repeated for a long time. And now it's just maintaining how good you are at the thing that you've gotten good at. I've had that experience where I start thinking, okay, what's the next way to take it up? Because people who are creative, they're always going for that little high that you get when you solve a problem or when you do something new. And at some point, those moments get fewer and farther between in that specific thing you've chosen. So for people who are struggling with that right now, how might they recognize it? And how might they start working with the internal struggles of, but I'm so good at this, but that's what people expect of me, but all the things you would say after the word but, and all the excuses you give yourself. How would you help talk someone through that?
Reassessing the why behind all of it again, reassessing those stories, because for a lot of us, that thing that we're not supposed to quit, that we're so good at, or because we're so good at it, oftentimes it is an industry or something that we did where we had to beat out the competition time after time after time, right? Whether it was you had to get the best grades to get into the top school and then into the top program and then the top internships and then the top jobs, right? Sometimes when we've gone through our careers and others around us have had to quit because they didn't make the cut. The idea of quote unquote, I've got my air quotes out now, quitting kind of jars us back into that, oh, because I didn't make the cut. So talking yourself through that, like, no, I've made the cut. I made every cut I needed to make. And now I am making a decision for who I am now. And I think it's really understanding that we as humans are meant to evolve and change. I think it's recognizing that we live longer and fuller and more active lives. That, it's not over when you hit 60, right? Like you could have a whole other career at that point when that wasn't the case even 50 years ago. Right? So if you hit that, you hit middle age and you think, well, I want to do something else. And you think like, I've only got like 10, 15 years till retirement. No, you could have a whole other career. So a lot of it is understanding where those thoughts came from in the first place, understanding that we are meant to grow and evolve, and giving ourselves permission to make decisions for who we are becoming.
One thing that I was thinking about as you said that just now is the fact that generationally, we watched those of us who had the good fortune of being around our grandparents, like their generation, 2 generations up from us, they got trained at doing a thing and they kind of did that thing their whole life. That was their job. Not necessarily if they were creative. My grandparents were engineers, they did that engineer thing the whole time. They didn't like try this. They didn't get to a point where they dabbled in that. And then our parents come along and it seems like their generation was a little more fluid. Like maybe they started out doing this thing, unless they went into something specific like dentistry or some medical kind of stuff. But I know I saw mine try on like a full-time job, try on a little business ownership, little entrepreneurial stuff here and there. And it seems like my generation has been a little more fluid. It's not like you go to college and you learn to be this thing and then you stick with it for 40 years. Are you seeing that kind of anecdotal evidence bear out in the different generations you work with?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. I mean, in my example, my grandparents were Armenian immigrants. So they were fresh off the boat, and talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They just needed a job. They had like a skill that they could do that would put food on the table and keep a roof over their head. My grandfather used to tell the story. He used to tell my dad that, if your family is healthy and you have a place, you have a roof over your head, and he meant literally you have shelter, you're not exposed, and you have food to eat, and no one is trying to kill you, you can't ask for anything more in life. That's it. That's happiness. And that's what they came to. And then my parents had the luxury of choosing a profession, of choosing to go to college and do something that they were interested in. And both of them kind of, they took some pivots, but they were like, my mom was a librarian her entire career. Different kinds of librarian, but a librarian, right? My dad took some pivots, but basically he did the same thing. And I think our generation is seeing that, like, hey, I'm in my 40s, I'm in my 50s, like I feel really good physically. I probably will feel good physically for longer, and I want to try something else. For me, it was seeing when I played in an orchestra in Miami in my 20s at the start of my career, and the Miami City Ballet was next door. And so, of course, we all have the same schedule, right? We work on the weekends, we have Mondays off, our mornings are free. And so we all became friends. And I saw them talking about retirement. And as, after we left Miami, I would see them retire as dancers in their late 20s and early 30s and go to have a completely different career. They'd go back to college, they'd get new degrees. And I was always a little bit jealous of the fact that they got to do multiple cool things with their life. And I agree with you. I think that is really shifting for people. But the example that they have in front of them is that, am I supposed to do that? Am I allowed to do that? We're still in that in-between territory.
You bring up such a good point about the ballet dancers. It's really the same in the elite sports where everything's a trade-off. If you do something at a high enough level, you absolutely trade something for that opportunity. And for them, it's their bodies. So by age 30, their feet are shot. They're all of the things that make them so good at what they've trained their body to be able to do start breaking down at some point, and they just can't keep up with the new crop of people who have great freshly 19-year-old joints and all the ability to perform and recover so that they can perform again. And then there's a point at which the body doesn't allow them to do that, and they have to figure something else out. So that's a great, I guess, segue into talking about people who that's sort of built in to what they chose to do. Like they can choose to do something at a really high level, but only for a season of their life.
And I think for a lot of industries, because that's a really important point that you just brought up, is that people who are in those elite sports, they give everything, even their schedule, right? When they are in season, that's it. No, they're not going to your dinner party. No, they're not going to their cousin's wedding. No, they are 100% focused. And for years, year after year after year, they just have to say no. But it's understood that it's not forever. It's understood that, okay, I do this until I'm this age, and then I get to go do whatever I want. I can have my life back, right? For other industries, like if you're an actor, whether you're on Broadway, whether you're on stage, you're doing shows every weekend, most nights of a week. You're doing 8 shows a week sometimes. If you're a movie actor, a film actor, you're on set for months at a time where you don't see your friends and family. And you can be an actor until the end of time. And same thing with the classical musician. You are practicing hours and hours and hours a day by yourself in rehearsals, flying. You get to a certain age, like that takes a toll. We're tired. And that's one thing I noticed, during the pandemic when I put together those online programs and I had the most famous cellists in the world involved with them, because you know what, their concerts were canceled too. And I had so many conversations with people saying like, I'd be like, oh, hey, how are you? Like I hadn't seen them in 10 years. Oh, how are you doing? Like, oh, Kate, I'm so tired. Like, I'm so tired of this. They have no plans of quitting, but already just week after week on a new flight, new orchestra, new concerts, new performances, it takes a toll. And I think people are waking up to the fact that they don't have to do it. There are enough people in the world who want nothing more than to continue doing it. They love it. That's it. There's nowhere else they want to be. Great. great. They can keep doing it for the rest of us.
And, bless those people because
Bless those people. Yeah.
the world needs them. One thing I wanted to talk to you about, because the name of your book is Beyond Potential. It is written in a lot of ways for creatives. And the word potential, I feel, especially for the creatives who I know, they never feel quite good enough. They never feel quite like they are where they imagined being when they started this journey. They're not a household name like Picasso yet. So clearly I've got work to do, is that little thing in the background. How do you address that?
I'm so glad you brought that up. There are a lot of ways to interpret that title, Beyond Potential. Does it mean taking the potential you had to be the next Picasso and getting even better than that? To me, it means something wildly different. To me, I'm thinking about, I'm coming from a place where people tell you externally what your potential is. Oh, James, you're such a wonderful photographer. You've got real potential here. You've got potential to be a really great photographer. Kate, you have so much potential to be a world-class cellist. We grow up and people tell us what our potential is. People tell us. And this book is saying, like, why don't you go beyond what other people have been telling you your potential is, and you decide for yourself what your potential is. You design your potential and you go after it. That to me is really exciting.
And I like that because it is not just a internal yearning to, hey, did I take this as far as I possibly could? It's really evaluating, okay, did I do this because I wanted to do this, or did I do it because I believed I could based on someone else's story that they had for me?
I mean, I have a little game, a little exercise in my book that I take my clients through a lot when they're struggling with this, and I call and what's next? And the example that I often give is if somebody says like, oh, hey, okay, I think I might want to try gardening. I want to grow some vegetables, right? So I'm going to I'll try some herbs on the windowsill. And that goes well. And go, okay, well, that goes well. What's next? What's after that? Oh, okay, well, I think I'll grow some pots of tomatoes and peppers on my patio. See how that goes. Okay, great. What's next? Well, then, I'll find a little plot in my yard and grow some vegetables. And you go on, and maybe that leads to, I'm going to get a little greenhouse, or I'm going to get a chicken or two. And then you say, okay, what else? And they stop. And maybe somewhere in their mind, somebody had said, oh, you would be a great farmer, right? And they realize they don't really want more than the chickens. They don't want to have to take care of goats and cows and actual livestock and not be able to take a vacation because somebody has to feed the animals every day. And they realize, no, actually, that's my dream. If I had a wonderful, beautiful kitchen garden and some flowers and a couple of chickens for fresh eggs, that's my dream. And it's not that I'm not capable of doing more. It's just that I don't want more than that. That's it. That's great. So I always tell people to take a step back and build it up slowly. What would the next step be? What would the next step be? And I think everybody that I've done this exercise with naturally feels that resistance of no. Sometimes it's oh my God, I would love to have some goats and some cows. I don't know how I would do it, but I would love it. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so that's a different kind of resistance. That's I haven't learned those skills yet. I haven't figured it out, but I want it, right? We know when we're no, enough is enough. I don't need that.
And it can be a slippery slope because sometimes if you are exploring something new and you've got that energy behind it, and let's say you are dipping your toe in, okay, I'm just going to branch out from my normal life that I've set up over here, and I am going to start making homemade soap from the goat's from the goat that I got. And you start doing that because that it's intoxicating to learn something new. I know it is for me. It's like, oh, I'm all in this, and I get to learn about the processes and how everything comes together, and it's fascinating. And maybe it's just for a short time that it's interesting, and then you go back to your life. But sometimes what happens, this has happened to me, is you go down the rabbit hole on something, you enjoy it, and then someone comes along and ruins everything by saying, oh, this is great. You should sell these. You should, if it's painting that you like, well, you should start selling your paintings at little crafts fairs or something like that. And I've met so many people who took the way that they're opening up their exploration and whatever hobby they got into, and someone came along and said, you know what? You've got, like you said before, you've got the potential to make some money with this. You've got the potential to make a lot of people happy with this thing you're doing. You should get into it more. Then you start entertaining that, and maybe you do get into it until the point where you ruin it for yourself. Have you seen people go through that process before?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard not to listen to those external ideas. People are really good at making us feel like we're idiots if we don't do something that they suggest. But, there's a concept in coaching that I learned that I worked a lot with Tara Moore, brilliant coach and writer. And she talks about unhooking from praise and criticism. What that whole concept is about is that when people say something like that, hey, like this is great soap, like you should sell this. That's coming more from their identity, their ideas about what's important in life, that, maybe they really like natural goat's milk soap, and maybe they are looking for some ways to make some extra money in their life. So when they recognize something in somebody else's life, it seems like a no-brainer. When maybe you don't need to make money off of that. Maybe you don't want to. Maybe you don't want to have to do it, to make a certain number of bars every week. I started doing cross stitch this year, all stemmed from I wanted a Nutcracker Christmas pillow, and I couldn't find it, but then I found a pattern. I'm like, all right, I'll make it myself for next Christmas. And it's been so wonderful. And at first, my competitive brain was like, okay, I'm going to do this section in January and this section in February. I mean, it's huge and ornate and it takes forever. Then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to work on it a little bit at a time, and it'll be finished when it's finished.
Yeah.
And allowing myself to just have a hobby is a beautiful thing. We know if we listen to ourselves, again, try to block out that external noise. If we listen to ourselves, we know which things we want to just remain hobbies and for ourselves on our own timelines, and which things we do. As you said, like you try something new, you follow that rabbit hole, and sometimes you do think, wait, this is the thing I've been looking for. I've been looking for a way to make an extra $1,000 a month so I could pay for my travels that I love. And this is perfect. And yeah, I could totally make 100 bars a month and sell them, and this is perfect. You know that, and you'll feel it in your gut. You'll feel it for yourself.
How do you work with people who are struggling with trying to figure out how they introduce themselves? If they are a person like yourself, you were a professional cellist one day, and then people that you hadn't seen in 2 or 3 years, you see them again after that period of time. They're like, oh, this is Kate, the cellist. And you're like, no, now I'm Kate, the coach. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's
How
really
do you help
tricky.
people come up with that identity thing?
It's so tricky, and it depends on where you are with it.
Yeah.
Because when I was starting to write more, and my identity inside had shifted, I'm no longer a cellist, I'm now a writer and a coach. If you say I'm a writer and a coach, everybody's next question is, oh, what have you written? Well, and so sometimes you just say, well, it's complicated. And what I learned was the easiest thing to say in those moments was just to say, I'm pivoting into something new, still figuring it out. I'll keep you posted. The most difficult thing for me was when I was meeting new people, right? Because in those situations, people knew me as Kate the cellist. They knew what I was about. They had a sense of who I am and what I have done with my life. And for me to say, oh, I'm pivoting away from that, figuring it out, they can understand that. They can wrap their head around it. For people who are meeting me innocently for the first time, like, oh, hey, what do you do? I'm like, well, so honestly, I don't have a perfect answer. Sometimes, depending on the situation, I would just say, not much.
Yeah.
I'm not really working right now. Which was the dream. Of course I was working. I was working a ton, but it was just felt too complicated. And if people wanted to think that I was just a lady of leisure,
A professional sunbather in
a professional
Bermuda.
sunbather, great, more power to me, right? They were like, wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it's pretty nice. A couple hours a week, I actually do it. Sometimes I would say like, well, it's complicated. I was a professional musician and now I'm pivoting into the coaching and writing.
Yeah.
And they would sort of sense like, oh, I'm curious about that. I want to know more. Or they'd be like, okay, I'll leave it alone.
Yeah.
The hardest thing, James, was my husband, who was so proud to be married to a cellist. I mean, listen, he's a wonderful human being. Like, people get really upset when I start the story with that. But, like, he loves me. He's proud of everything I do. Yeah. But there was something, he's a scientist, right? So to be like, well, my wife is a cellist, that seemed really exotic and like really cool. And like my wife plays on all these big stages with all these famous people. Like, oh yeah, she was hanging out with Jay-Z last week. He loved it. He loved it and he loved seeing me on stage. And so he lived on this island for a long time when I started dating him. So I would come and visit and like, oh, this is my girlfriend, Kate. She's a cellist. Oh, this is my wife, Kate. She's a cellist. Everybody else would say, oh, this is Paul's wife, Kate. She's a cellist.
Yeah.
And then they were like, I don't know what to say. Yeah. And finally one day he was like, baby, I don't know how to introduce you. And I said, well, honey, you could just say, this is my wife, Kate.
What?
And he was like, oh. I'm like, yeah. That person and I can figure it out from there.
Yeah.
You can just introduce me as your wife, Kate. And it was like, oh, I don't have to place a label on you. We naturally do that. I mean, I think it's almost an American thing too, right? Like I don't think they do that in France. Nobody says like, oh, this is Jacques. He's a high school teacher. No, this is just Jacques, right? So just introduce yourself as yourself and let the conversation take it from there.
Where I was going to go a minute ago, and you jumped right into it. We were talking about how do you introduce yourself to strangers can be difficult, but then you got into the people who've known you the longest, and I would love to talk about your experience with that, because the people who have known you since you picked up that cello and at 4.5 years old, that's been your identity to them also. So when you've done something so long, you got to a certain point and then you want to take a left turn with your life or a right turn or whatever kind of turn, but it's not the you that they've known for so long, and they've got some investment in that. They've got some security in that too, right? What is it like when you start to get pushback or those questions like, oh, why are you throwing away, all of this to do this unknown thing out here? I'm guessing it's the people that you've known the longest who might have the most pushback for you.
Certainly. I mean, the people I've known the longest are, of course, my colleagues. We grew up together, right? The classical music world is very small. We went to the same summer camps as kids. We went to the same music schools as young adults. We've circled around each other in our careers. And the ones who had difficulty, I mean, there were a lot of them, out of love and care and respect for who I was as an artist, tried to stop me from doing it. And once I did it, we're like, okay, great, whatever, fine. Like, let's hang out on Friday. The ones who really struggled with it, who almost like couldn't talk to me, who were ready to shut off the friendship, and some actually did cut off the friendship. In hindsight, with a few years looking back, they have admitted or I have seen that was more about their insecurity about what it meant if I just so easily quit doing the thing that meant so much to them? Does it mean that it's not important? Am I saying that what they do is silly? Of course not. But if they are wondering, that's on them. That's on them. So again, when people have these reactions, it always has more to do with them than you. And just handling that, and the ones who were ready to cut off the friendship have since come back where everything's fine. We found each other again. But I think a lot of people will struggle with as they're, for lack of a better word, lashing out at you for your decisions, are struggling with what it means for them more than anything else.
So that's important to remember. It's more about them than it is about you.
Yeah, everything is. Yeah. Even if somebody says, "Ooh, I love your hair."
Yeah.
Maybe that just means they have curly hair too, and they, they respect somebody whose curls aren't frizzy or whatever, right? Like, if they say, "Oh, I love your dress," maybe they just really like that color.
If someone's listening to our conversation today and they see a little bit of themselves or someone they really care about in the things we've been talking about, what's the best way for someone to connect with you, learn more about what you do, how you help people, and check out the book?
Yeah, well, I have my website, Kayaian.com, and grab the book anywhere, Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, ask your local bookstore for it. You can get it on bookstore.org. I have a great resource for anybody who has been listening to this and you're thinking like, yeah, I want to try this. I want to think about who I want to become and how I can take steps and go through that process. I have a great resource. It's called my quarterly retreat planning guide. It's just setting out the next 90 days ahead of you. And it's just what you were talking about. Like if there's something that you're curious about, something you want to learn, you don't have to commit to becoming fluent in Italian. You can just say over the next 90 days, I'm going to check out Duolingo and work on some Italian, right? So it's a way to kind of step out, to take steps towards becoming closer to that person over the next 90 days and sort of deciding like, how do you want to feel over the next 3 months? Who do you want to have around you over the next 3 months? Who do you need to meet? Who do you need help from? What skills do you want to develop, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a really great resource. It's I work with it with my clients and I offer it to your podcast listeners for free. You can put the link in the show notes. And otherwise, just, come find me on Instagram and say hello. I love chatting with people in the DMs.
I love what you just described because all of those things you just mentioned are action items. And sometimes if you are having struggles of, oh gosh, I'm so good at this, but I really want to explore this, just taking that little first action, that what next that you spoke about earlier is going to let you know really quick if this is really something that you need to explore or, oh, that was just an itch I needed to scratch and now I've done it and I'm good.
Yeah.
Good to go back. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for spending some time having this conversation today.
That was such a pleasure, James. Thank you so much. It was great.
Thanks for joining me today. If something in this episode stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Screenshot it and tag me or DM me on the socials, send smoke signals, whatever works. I want to know what you're plotting. This show isn't just about listening. It's about building something real together. So I hope to hear from you soon, and I'll be right here next week when you're ready to keep the rebellion going.